So I'm going to read you guys a book that my grandmother wrote, Bobby Snow Boal. She wrote and illustrated this book in the 1950s, and it's about growing up in Valdosta, Georgia, which is right here on this map behind. And it's a delightful little book. The pages are on this cover are kind of falling off a little bit. And you can see here an inscription that she wrote for me, with lots and lots and lots and lots of love to my favorite granddaughter, Erin. May God bless you always. She called each of us grandchildren her favorites. And in her last couple weeks of life, I kept calling her my favorite grandmother as a callback to that, which she always got a good kick out of. I'm going to take off this cover because it worries me sometimes. It's old paper and very fragile. And you can see, actually, it doesn't really need that cover because it's got a color picture on the actual hardcover of the book, which is pretty cool. A Tree for Phyllis and Me, written and illustrated by Bobby Snow Boal. A Tree for Phyllis and Me. When I was a little girl, we lived down in South Georgia, which was a wonderful place for a little girl to live, believe me. For one thing, the weather was almost always summertime, and that meant that you didn't have to worry much at all about having to bundle into a lot of clothes in the mornings. In fact, about all a little girl needed to wear was just a dress and something under it, something to match if possible, as it always looked more stylish if she decided to skin the cat on the trapeze bars in the park, or do a cartwheel or a handstand. You may have noticed that I didn't mention shoes, and you probably thought I forgot them, but I didn't. One of the specially nice things you see was that you didn't even need to wear shoes when the weather was warm, if your mother let you go barefoot, which most mothers did. My mother did, and so did Phyllis's mother. But you don't know who Phyllis is, do you? So I had better explain. When we first moved to our house from the apartment we used to live in, I was a little bit lonesome because there weren't any little girls in the new neighborhood. While in the old neighborhood, my goodness, there must have been a dozen in just our one block. I needn't have worried, though, because right away a large family moved into the big wooden house whose backyard joined our backyard. Most of the children in this family, I was disappointed to see, were nearly grown, 12 years old or better. But there was one who was somewhere near my own age. She was a wiry little kid with longish hair that was usually tousled because she was always running or doing flips or back bends. As a matter of fact, that is what she was doing the first time we met. She and one of her sisters were putting on a regular show in their backyard. I think they had noticed my sister and me looking out the window, and maybe they were a little lonely too. At any rate, the big girl, whose name turned out to be Sarah, was acting like the director. "Do a back somersault, Phyllis," she would say, and before she had the words out of her mouth, over the little girl would go. "Now back the other way, Phyllis. Now stand on your hands. Now kick over and touch your heels to your head. Now a back bend and hello." That last, the hello, was meant for Jenny, my sister, and me, who had just accidentally wandered over and were inspecting some weeds along the path that connected the two backyards. I don't remember just what either of us said next, but we must have made friends very fast, because after that it seemed as if we had always known one another. Ginny and Sarah, being more mature, liked to walk around arm in arm discussing movie stars, and when they would be old enough to wear lipstick and such. But Phyllis and I had lots more fun. Phyllis and I played all sorts of games together. Dolls, jump rope, plike, which was short for play-like and meant the same as let's pretend. Snake in the gutter, a running game. Ain't no booger bears out tonight. This one had to be played after sundown in order to be scary and required permission from both sets of parents. And hopscotch, just to name a few. But our specialty, and our very favorite, the thing that made a special feeling of understanding between us, was climbing trees. Right off, I'd better admit that Phyllis was a lot better tree climber than I was. She could feel more at home hanging by 1 foot from the top branch of a tree than I could 6 feet off the ground holding onto the trunk with both hands. But, being kind at heart, she never seemed to notice this. And so together we spent many a happy hour perched like birds on a limb, looking down our noses at the poor, ground-fast people below. If you haven't had much experience climbing trees, you may think there is not much to it. Maybe you even think one tree is about like the next. Please let me tell you, and Phyllis would agree with me, this couldn't be further from the truth. During our tree climbing days, and these lasted until we were in junior high school, we must have climbed hundreds of trees, with special attention to those within 3 blocks of where we lived. And believe me, we got to be experts. A cedar, for example, is not a good climber, no matter how well spaced the limbs are, because the trunk is so rough you can never relax and feel comfortable. And a pine is bad because it leaks that sticky resin all over everything. Wild cherries, unless they are pretty old, aren't usually strong enough, as I can't forget because of one unhappy accident. One day, Phyllis and I were climbing a slim little wild cherry tree by her back fence, when all of a sudden it gave in the middle, bent over, and placed us gently on the ground. This was so much fun that we did it over and over again, until all of a sudden there was a snap, crackle, pop, like the breakfast cereal says, and that tree had broken smack in two. We got something of a jolt as we hit the ground, but it was nothing compared to the jolt Phyllis's pop gave us when he saw what had happened. It seems he was sort of training the tree to decorate that particular spot in the yard. He told us not to ever let him see us up in a tree again, and oh misery, for a few awful days it looked as if our tree climbing days were over. Phyllis and I could be quite a team when we tried, however, and we spent the best part of the next 3 days asking her pop if maybe he hadn't changed his mind, maybe. Finally, he said, all right, and life straightened out again. But to get back to explaining about trees, a mimosa is a wonderful tree to climb because, besides having such lovely pink powder puff flowers on it, the limbs are wide and grow almost straight out on the level. On the other hand, trees whose branches go nearly straight up have very few spots that lend themselves to being sat on. A camphor is another grand tree. The limbs are as strong as can be, but so limber that you can swing and sway in a most exciting manner. Our mothers often said it seemed as if those two, meaning us, lived in a tree. What they didn't know was that we really did, or at least pretended we did. Phyllis's house was a big chinaberry tree right in the center of her backyard. To get up in it, you stepped first on a great big flat rock right by the trunk. then up on a large, gnarled knot, and from there it was easy to catch hold of a branch and pull on up. At times, I envied Phyllis her chinaberry tree. It had the nicest, broadest branches you could wish for, and a number of other special features besides. For one thing, there was the view. By looking one way, you could get a fine view of the street, including the drugstore where each afternoon we bought one popsicle and carefully split it down the middle. By asking her folks for a nickel one day and my folks the next, we were almost always sure of getting it. By looking another way, especially with the aid of the telescope, we got by pooling our box tops. We could note the goings-on the side porch swing, where one of Phyllis's older sisters was almost sure to be entertaining one of her many boyfriends. And by climbing over to the other side and leaning over, you could look right into the kitchen window to see what Phyllis's mama was fixing for dinner. Another nice thing about the chinaberry tree, it had a great big hook coming out of the trunk. Somebody had put it there a long time before, and the tree had grown right around it so that it wouldn't ever come out. We always used the hook for one special thing, to hang Phyllis's basket full of kittens on. Phyllis had a sweet mother alley cat who lived in the basket, whether the basket was on the ground or up in the tree. She had kittens quite often, and so there always were some kittens in the basket. And kittens are very pleasant companions because they like to climb trees too. Up in the chinaberry was a wide forked branch. One day, looking down through the fork, which was quite high off the ground, I got to thinking how it would feel to jump down. I talked this over with Phyllis, and we agreed it would take a good bit of daring. Then, being an old show-off, I jumped. My feet hit the ground hard, my knees folded, and somehow banged into my jaw. I got up dazed, wiped a little blood from my tongue, which had gotten caught between my teeth, and tried my jaw to see if it would work. "Did it hurt? Did it hurt?" Phyllis was quite thrilled. "Oh, no," I shakily answered. "Not really." Phyllis was not to be outdone. Without a word, down she jumped between the forked branches. "Did it hurt?" I asked. She got up, rubbed a skinned knee, and smiled a crooked smile. "Why, no," she said. "Not really, that is." Somehow, though, from that time on, we didn't care quite as much for that particular forked branch. Until one day we got a wonderful idea. We found some strong cord in the garage and strung it back and forth between the branches of the fork, and then wove small branches and leaves back and forth between the string. The result was a lovely little nest where we could rest in complete safety. Our little nest had other uses too, as we soon found out. You see, Phyllis was supposed to dry the dishes at her house after Sarah finished washing them. Of course, drying dishes wasn't nearly as much fun as climbing trees, and Phyllis was always hunting some way to get out of it. One day, we were curled peacefully behind our cozy screen of leaves when Sarah came to the back door to call Phyllis to come dry. "Phyllis! Oh, Phyllis, where are you?" No answer. "Phyllis, honey, come here." No answer. Then, with a change in tone, "Phyllis, you'd better come on." Still no answer. "Phyllis, I see you hiding in the garage." We nearly choked on that one and had to hug ourselves to keep from laughing out loud. Sarah came down the steps and went over to look in the garage. We scrunched down low and kept quiet. Sarah muttered something about, "Here just a little while ago," and then slammed angrily back into the house. When she was safely gone, we laughed until we could hardly breathe. From then on, we called the nest our hideout, and it certainly deserved the name. Phyllis's chinaberry was real handy too, for playing a target game we invented. All you had to do was reach out and pull off a handful of the chinaberries, and then take turns seeing who could come nearest to getting one in the saucer over by the steps where the kittens drank their milk. This took a lot of skill. Well, you can see why I envied Phyllis a little, her chinaberry being just naturally so grand. But I finally found a house for myself in my own backyard that, in some ways at least, even beat the chinaberry. At first, things looked pretty dark because most of the trees in our yard were huge, towering pines that would never do, not only because of the rosin I already told you about, but because it would take nothing short of a monkey to climb one. The trunks were too big around to grasp, and they didn't have any branches until they got way up in the sky. Other than these pines, most of our trees were really hardly more than bushes that a baby could have climbed. And for experts like Phyllis and me, this would have been a big letdown. I considered the fig tree, but decided against it. A fig tree has a funny effect on people. It makes you itch all over. There are tiny little prickles in the leaves, and you just can't live around them for very long at a time. I didn't think about the pecan tree until I tried nearly every other tree in our yard because I had never been able to get up in it. The limbs were too high off the ground for me to reach. But finally I got desperate enough to give it one more try. I got a long running start, raced like mad, leaped up on as high as I could, and there I was, hanging by my hands from the bottom limb, swinging back and forth from the impact. It was easy then to put a foot up over the limb and climb right on up. Once up, I saw the pecan tree had lots of good points not noticeable from the ground. For one thing, you could go up so high in perfect safety if you just held on tight. And there were so many interesting limbs. A big, limber swinging one at the bottom I decided to use for my front porch. Then there were a couple of other big ones almost on the same level that I called the living room. Up to the right was a broad, sloping one with plenty of smaller branches to hold on to. The bedroom, of course. Then there was a stub where a small limb had been broken off, and this made such a good hook to hang things on that I named it the clothes closet. And almost any limb would do for the dining room, as the branches were all loaded with nuts. The view was not the best, to be sure, since it consisted mainly of the roof of our garage and the field beyond the fence where Pete, another neighbor, kept his goat. But there was a good view across the garden to Phyllis's chinaberry home. As soon as I noticed this, I hurried down and ran to tell Phyllis all about it. She rushed right back with me, and I showed her how to get hold of the bottom limb. When we were both up among the branches, panting a little from the running and jumping, we agreed that it was really an advantage to have a home that was hard to enter like mine. It made it seem so much more private once you were up. Then, too, if any of the little kids from around the corner should come over, they wouldn't be able to pester you. A couple of days went by, and I began to feel I needed some special feature for my home. After all, Phyllis had both the hideout and the kittens. Then an idea came to me. I was banging a little stick against some old pop bottles that were partly filled with water from a recent rain, and I happened to notice that they sort of played a tune. Then I tried each bottle separately and found out each one was a different note. By pouring a little water out or putting a little more in, I could change the note either higher or lower. I got all excited about this And the next time Phyllis came over, I showed her my new music room. I had a row of the pop bottles hanging from a limb and tuned so that when you hit them, they played do, re, mi, fa, so. You know, the first 5 notes of the scale. I'd only been able to get the bottles arranged that far. Somehow I couldn't get the bottles that would tune to la, ti, do. But I could play the first 3 lines of Polly Wolly Doodle and the verse and chorus of Oh Susanna, except you had to sing the highest note without the music. Well, the days went by, and I'd forgotten just when it was. But one day, Phyllis and I heard that you can make telephones with tin cans. You were supposed to get 2 large tin cans and punch holes in the bottoms. Then you got a long piece of string and 2 buttons. One end of the string you pushed through the hole in the bottom of one tin can, and then tied it to a button on the inside so it wouldn't pull out. Then you fixed the other end of the string the same way with the other tin can. After that, you each took a tin can and walked until the string was stretched tight, and then talked into the tin can. We tried this out and found that the result was a very loud bzzm bzzm sound. It wasn't too easy to hear what the other person said, but the sound of the voice was definitely carried down the string in some manner, and this was good enough for us. We soon had a telephone connecting our tree houses. We must have made quite a racket in those quiet summer afternoons. Bring, bring. Phyllis, your telephone is ringing. Okay, Phyllis would shout across the garden. Hello? Can you bring your kitten over for a visit today? Spoken into the telephone. What? I couldn't hear you, Phyllis would yell. I said, could you and the kittens come over here? I would scream back. Sure, goodbye. After a little while, somebody's phone would ring again. Bring, bring. Hey, can't you hear your phone ringing? And so on. You can imagine how much fun we had. The telephone started us off on the idea of connecting the 2 trees, and soon another idea had grown out of this one. We found a lot of old clothesline of my mother's and tied it all together so that it was long enough to reach from one tree to the other and back again. We looped it over a branch in my tree, then carried the 2 ends over to the chinaberry and climbed up. We threw one end over a limb, then tied the 2 ends together. Next, we tied a string around a little box and joined it to the knot in the rope. Then came the big event. With Phyllis and her tree and with me and the pecan tree, we began to pull the rope. She pulled the upper rope, I pulled the lower rope. And do you know what happened? The little box moved right through the air from her tree to mine. We were so thrilled we almost fell out of our trees. We raced down the path and hugged one another, then dashed into the kitchen to get some soda crackers to put in the box. Then we climbed up our trees again and spent a very happy time sending one another presents of soda crackers, pecans, and china berries. This was a very exciting new discovery, all right, but it was a bit slow. If you want the absolute truth, we could have run back and forth with the box much quicker than we could pull it across. But of course, it would not have been as much fun. Anyway, we got an even better idea. Daddy let us have a long piece of lightweight wire that was in the garage. We connected it between the 2 trees. When I wanted to send something to Phyllis, I bent my end of the wire around a limb high up in the tree, and Phyllis connected her end down low. Then, if I fixed the little box with a loop of string over the wire so it could slide, I could send it across just by shaking the wire. And when Phyllis wanted to send the box back, she connected her end of the wire high, and I tied mine low. It worked just fine. One thing led to another, and the first thing you knew, we had those 2 trees so strung up with wires and strings and ropes and stuff that it really was a sight to see. People passing on the street used to stop and stare. This page is just full illustration. The only full picture spread in the book. Whenever we got tired of playing in our trees, we could go over to the high school campus just down the street. Behind the grandstand were the most wonderful camphor trees you have ever seen. Honestly, they were a sight. They were taller by far than the grandstand, and it was high enough. Phyllis and I used to climb as high as we could, then inch out on a swingy limb and drop down on the top seat of the grandstand. It would have been an interesting way to get to see the football games free, but it was sort of wasted in this respect. Our daddies always bought us season tickets to the games anyway. As time went on, we got to know several other little girls who shared our love of tree climbing, and together we formed a sort of club that met from time to time in one tree or another. We even let little Mary from across the park join. She was 3 years younger than we were, but you should have seen the loquat trees in her front yard. They grew right over the sidewalk and had such thick foliage that you could be completely hidden from people going by on the sidewalk, who never even suspected they were being spied on from above. And as if this wasn't enough, those trees of Mary's had sweet loquats on them that were almost as big as lemons. I have no idea what a loquat is or if I'm saying it right, but apparently it was a thing in Valdosta in the South. I guess somebody knows what it is. Where did it all end? Well, it's hard to say. One day, Phyllis and I were eating our lunch in the pecan tree. Yes, we even ate in the trees if our mothers were in a especially willing mood. It came to me all of a sudden that time was passing by mighty fast, and that one of these days, if we didn't watch out, we were going to grow up. We were already beginning to copy our sisters just a little bit, and to notice which dress we wore rather than just grabbing the first one on the rack. Phyllis, I said, do you realize that right now, this very moment, won't ever come again? Even by tomorrow, all that is happening today will be in the past. And then another day will come, and another. Time is going by all the time, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. Phyllis was silent for a minute. I'll tell you what let's do, she said. Let's remember this very minute, right now, just as long as we live. Time passed, and as I had predicted, Phyllis had her hair cut and curled, and her sisters began to complain that they never got to use the side porch swing anymore. Mother bought me a very grown-up pink slip with ruffles and ribbon bows, and it sort of changed my outlook on things. I knew, for example, that skinning the cat was out of the question from then on. More and more time rushed by, and here it is, today. And do you know that now Phyllis and I are both grown up and married and live about 1,000 miles apart instead of right next door? But if we ever notice a good climbing tree as we go to and from the grocery store and get the urge to slow down time for a minute, all we have to do is remember that special moment. Then there we are, little girls again, sitting high and happy in the pecan tree in the backyard. Now, just one more thing. Someday when you're having a wonderful time, skating or playing kick the cans, or maybe even climbing trees, or doing whatever it is that you like to do best, stop for just a minute and remember just how it feels. And then when you're grown up and have little girls of your own, you'll know just how they feel. It really works. You can take it from Phyllis and me. The end.